Okay, good morning. So we're up to Siman Reish Lamed Hey Sif Beis. We're working through the halachas of Krishma at night as parts of Maariv or separately. So we're up to halacha Beis, and now we're going to list the various things you're not allowed to do before you daven Maariv or say Krishma at night, lest you get distracted and don't get to say Krishma. So says the Mechaba in Sif Beis. Also lahaschil le'echol, you're not allowed to begin to eat chatzi sha'ah somach lezman kriyah shel arvis, half an hour before the zman of kriyah of nacht. Ve'im hischil le'echol, but if you began to eat achar shehegia zmano, then mafsik v'koyer kriyah, you've got to stop eating as soon as it gets zman v'koyer kriyah, and you read kriyah below birchoseha, without the brachas v'go mesudase. In other words, you're sitting there eating a meal. You shouldn't have started. You started after or within half an hour of tzeis. So the halacha is you've got to be mafsik. You've got to stop and you say kriyah, but you only have to be mafsik for kriyah. We'll see the Mishnah explains because that's deraisa, but not the brachas of kriyah, because they are derabanan and we only have to stop for deraisas. V'go mesudase, and then you finish your meal. And then you read it with the brachas and you daven, but you only have to be mafsik a suda for the deraisa of kriyah. Says the Ramah, avol ein tzorich lahafsik letfila. You don't have to stop for tefillah, hayel v'hischelechel, because you already started to eat. Therefore, Chazal will not didn't make you stop eating. Avol lo hischelechel, but if you haven't yet begun eating, afal pisha not al yodov, even though you've already washed your hands for the meal, then tzorich lahafsik. In other words, the whole hetzah to carry on. In other words, for kriyah you got to stop, but for the brachas or for tefillah, which is drabanan, you don't have to stop. But that's only if you've already begun eating. If you haven't begun eating, then you've got to you shouldn't begin eating. And even if you wash netilas yadayim without the bracha, we'll see, you should not continue. V'mein shus lispalel, and if there isn't going to be time later to daven, then you have to stop. Then mafsik the tefillah, you should be mafsik the tefillah. Okay, so let's see the Mishnah Berurah. So the Mechaber began and said, you're not allowed to eat within half an hour of tzeis before you got a chiyuv to say minat to say kriyah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Tes Zayin. And the reason is we're concerned that you might get engaged, involved in your suda, and you might get too immersed in it. You might fall asleep or just get involved in the meal. And you'll forget to say kriyah. Also, even to eat a small amount is also. Taste mine peiros or afilu pas b'kabetza, a very small amount. Shari, that would be allowed. Okay, Yud Zayin le'echol. So you can't eat within half an hour of the zman of saying kriyah of tzeis. V'chein lishan, nor can you sleep. Very dangerous thing to do, to have a shluf, late, sort of last night. The nacht was 9:30, something like that. So to go to lie down within half an hour of tzeis, we're worried you're going to miss zman kriyah. You'll sleep all the way through. V'chein lishan, all to sleep. V'afilu data rak lishan kimo. Even if your intention is to have a shorter shluf, that's not allowed. And not just sleep and eating, all the other activities that we spoke about in Reish Lamed Beis Sif Beis. If you remember that was the things you can't do before mincha. So, for example, having a haircut and going to the bursaki and all those sort of activities, whatever was prohibited before mincha back in Reish Lamed Beis is also included here. And certainly this is half an hour before, and certainly when the zman of kriyah has begun, you certainly can't begin those activities. The Eli Rabbi is mitzadid that he concludes and says that before the zman of kriyah you're allowed to, but not once the zman has begun. Miu, however, lilmoid, to learn l'kula al mashari b'somachla. Close to the zman of kriyah, everyone allows you to learn. V'adarabba, on the contrary, mitzvah, it's considered a mitzvah to learn, to just before the zman of kriyah, before night, because Amr B'Shas Adam Ba Min Asoda Be'erev this is considered the ideal conduct, that a person comes home from work or from the field in the evening, nichnas to Beis HaKnesses, first things he does is he goes to shul. Imrogel ikris kaira, if he can read, he should read. Lishnes l'shayne, if he can learn, he can learn. For kaira kriyishma mispalav, then after that seder he says kriyishma and davens. And that's the way he does things. Ava mishigir zman kriyishma, but once the zman has begun, the zman, it's now nacht, and you've got to say kriyishma. Osa af lilmod, then you shouldn't even learn kishum mispalav bebeisa b'yachid, when you're davening b'yachidus. But if he has a shomer, he says to his friends, remind me, then it's okay. So let's just summarize what we've said. We've said half an hour before tzeis, you can't get involved in other activities, eating, sleeping, all the things we said back in Reish Lamed Beis. However, you are allowed to learn before the Zman Kriyishma. In fact, that is ideal behavior. You come back from work, to go straight to the base of Medrash to learn, and then to go to say Kriyishma, Dav Maariv, then that's ideal. Now, but that's only before the Zman Kriyishma. Once Higir Zman Kriyishma, then you should really say Kriyishma straight away. But when is that true? We'll see soon the various details to this. For example, if you've got a minyan later, where you normally go to, that's considered fine. But if you're b'yechidus, and this is very nogea, let's say you're away on holiday, you're on business, and you're on your own, and there's no minyan nearby, so then once it's nacht, you should not be doing other things. You should be you're davening Maariv and saying Kriyishma straight away, because that's when this all kicks in. Now, if you look at Yud Tes, it says that's Kriyishma also after b'beisa b'yachid. Can you see there's a Yud Tes there? It's the first thing on the line. So that takes you down to the Shat Tzion. Now, why? Because if I've got Maariv at Hagas at 10 o'clock, yes, I know I've got my fixed time for Maariv, so I'm not worried about that. It's dafka b'yechidus that you should daven straight away when it gets to Nacht. Now, if you look at number 30, if you look at number 30, Obia Hagan Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, so Rav Shlomo Zalman explains, once you've got a fixed time for davening, you're going to come to Maariv at 5 to 7 here, right? Or whatever time it used to be, or whatever time Maariv is, then we're not worried about that. But it's dafka b'yechidus, which is an important thing. If you're, like I say, if you're traveling, you're on business, you're on holiday, that really, as soon as it gets to Zman, you should daven straight away, unless you appoint a shomer, he says. Then that's mutter. We'll see more about the shomer soon. Okay, Yudches, Chatzi Shah. So when does all of these restrictions kick in? Half an hour before the Zman. Das HaTaz L'Hokel B'zeh, an important Taz. The Taz says you can be a bit making on this. V'lo boy el shir miut. It doesn't necessarily mean half an hour. It means a shir muot. If you look at 31, he says V'tam hadovar kosav HaTaz shekiv zizman meruba lo yichmiru masha'enkim mincha shizman muot. For mincha, you've got a much smaller window to daven, and therefore half an hour is half an hour. It's machlikas stam if it's shaz manias or 30 minutes. Okay, that's machlikas. But either way, for mincha, there's no leniency. But it says the Taz for Maariv, you've really got much longer. You've got last night. The zman was, let's say, from Plag HaMincha, the earliest time. Let's say from Tzeis, we're talking about. Tzeis was 9:20 or something. And really, you've got certainly till Chatzois Halayla, which is 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, in the winter, you've got way longer. So the window for Maariv is going to generally be a lot longer, and you can really even daven till Alois HaShacha in extenuating situations. So you've got the whole night, basically. Okay. V'achreinim maskimim lifsak hashulchan aruch. The achreinim, however, don't like with this. They don't go with the Taz that it's even a zman mu'at, and they go with a half an hour of the Shulchan Aruch. V'chol deleka lechatzi shah also lahaskal lechal. And therefore, within half an hour, you shouldn't begin eating. V'im bikesh me'echot shehaskrin l'spalel. Leka isur lehaskal lechal. If, however, you remind someone, or you ask someone to remind you to daven, then there is no issur. You've got a shomer, and that helps. Even if it's already higiyah zman kriyishma. So, for example, your supper is being served, and it's now dark, and you say, okay, well, listen, can someone be a shomer for me and remind me that I haven't done Maariv? That works. Now, the question is, who can be a shomer? So the Ramah says. So if you look at number 33, here are the details. V'dafka im bikesh migodl shiaskirenu. You can't ask a kid. It's got to be someone who is an adult. That's generally that's when the Gemara talks about a shomer. You're sitting learning by an oil lamp on Shabbos. We're worried you might come to be mechaber to tweak the light. So a cotton ain't a moil b'kashomer. However, the Gon Chaim Kanievsky says that im yesh le das, a child who has got das, and Reb Chaim didn't use electricity in his house in Bnei Brak, and he would use a kerosene lamp or something, and he would always have a shomer with him on Shabbos. So he paskens that a child who has das is effective. What about a wife? Can a wife be a good shomer to remind you to have Maariv? So he says, "V'chein v'gam ishta," in the next paragraph, Kosav v'shad shuvas divrei yatziv, that's the Klausenberger, she'echayla l'shamish k'shomer, she can serve as a shomer to remind you to have Maariv and say Krishma. What about an alarm clock? What about how setting an alarm? You put your, an alarm goes off. Does that work? So he says something very interesting. The Indian sha'on ma'ireh, an alarm clock. Das hagon Shlomo Zalman Auerbach shemayel rak legabe isa chila koden tefillah, aval legabe isa sheina lo moyel. If you're eating and you set your alarm clock, then great, that works. But if you're sleeping, it's not going to work. Why? We all know why. Shecheshim shema yisarev yichabe v'yamshich. You'll press snooze. Yeah, that's the concern. If you're in the middle of eating, you'll remember that it's more of an effective reminder. Okay. What about tying a knot in your tie? Yeah, the proverbial tying a knot in your, or you're just, knot in your handkerchief. Yeah, does that work to remind you? So he says it's very interesting. Shesiman sheshom begodov lo moel klal. That doesn't help. However, Shlomo Zalman, Rabbi Yashiv and Reb Vosner says that it does. Shan Ma'ira does help for Shena as well. Nissen Karelet says the Shan Ma'ira it doesn't help at all for Shema, even for Achila, because the whole purpose of the Shema is to remind you to daven. Just when the alarm goes, you're thinking, why did I set the alarm? You're not going to remember. So there's generally debate about that. But either way, Shlomo Zalman says for a Shema to set an alarm clock for eating would help you, but not for sleeping. Others allow even sleeping, and others don't allow an alarm clock at all. Okay, let's press on. Yutes. So the Mechaber says you can't start other activities half an hour before the Zman Krishma. Says the Mishnah Berurah Yutes. Hainu somach letzei sakechovim. So that's half an hour before Nacht. Umash Mogen Avram. Okay, that we'll get to Miss Hashem. One shouldn't eat after Shkia on Shabbos afternoon, but b'diavad you can go to half an hour before Seis if you haven't yet eaten Shal Judas, or even if you're very hungry, etc. Those people who daven Maariv when it's still daylight, for example after Plag HaMincha, they daven an early Maariv, even though they've got to say Shema again at night, they're allowed to eat supper after they've davened Maariv before they say Krishma at night, because at the end of the day they have davened and they have said Krishma within Maariv, albeit early. But when it's properly night, then they should say Shema straight away and they shouldn't delay. So this is going on the Mechaber still. But if one was naughty and one began eating within half an hour, then you've got to be mafsik for Kriya Shema. Within half an hour, it's considered you should have. It's Higiyah Zman, and therefore you shouldn't have started eating, unless of course you've got a shomer, you've got a fixed time for Maariv, etc. So mafsik, you've got to stop straight away, miyad. Why? Kim the Kriya Shema deraisahu. For who is chil he shouldn't have started eating. And if he started before the half an hour, he is not mafsik for that. As long as there's time after the Suda to say Krishma, then we don't have to stop him because he started beheta. The Mishnah Berurah b'sif Kotan Chaf Gimel and Chaf Dalet. But you only have to stop for Shema, but not for the brachas. Mishum the brachas einam elam midrabanan lo hitrichu lahafsik b'shvilam. That we didn't trouble you to stop for the brachas of Krishma as well. Chaf Gimel is now going on the Ramah. Aval ein tzarich lahafsik the tefillah hayel v'tefillah le'echol. The Ramah says, aval im harei hischel le'echol. Then, if he didn't, if he hadn't yet begun, and you're now the zman of night, you should definitely stop. even if you've washed your hands. Kamesha Kosav HaMachaba, says the Mishnah Berurah in Chaf Gimel, Kamesha Kosav HaMachaba she'ena mafsik al likris krishma bilchud b'le brachas b'le shmon esrei u'mishum shirak b'drabanan v'hai the had shon ramah mishum the rotz l'saim avol, because he wants to add that last line of the avol. That's why he sort of repeated some of what the Machaba had said. Okay, Chaf Dalet. So Afal Pishin Nos Al Yodov. So again, the Ramah is saying that Ein Tzorich LaHafsik L'Tefillah, Avol Im Loi Hischelecha, if you haven't yet begun eating, Afal Pishin Nos Al Yodov Tzorich LaHafsik. Then, if you haven't begun eating, then within half an hour you should not start a meal, even if you wash your hands. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Chaf Dalet, Hainu, Af sheyesh oit shehus harbe lispal. Even though there's plenty more time to daven, machmirin yafsik. We within half an hour we make him stop if he hasn't yet begun eating. When it comes to mincha, we don't make him stop if he's already washed his hands. Then what's the difference? Here's the plus side. Since mincha is a much smaller window, he's anxious the whole time, and we're not worried he's going to be engaged in a very long meal. Masha'en came ba'arvish, there's mana b'diavad, kol alayla b'diavad, you can daven, like I said, till daybreak. Gazrinan, dilma osil mifsha v'yismich ala arichos shalayla. He's not in a hurry. He's got the whole night. So therefore, he might become very engaged in his eating, and he might fall asleep. He might eat too much or eat too long, and therefore we're worried. Lahachi calls man shalei hischil ba'achila atzma matruchin lehafsik afshin al yadav. And that's why there are more paskins that even if he hasn't yet begun eating, even though he's washed his hands and not yet said the bracha, then he should stop and he should just wait and say krishma at proper time and then have his meal. But davka kishle bircha dain al netilas daim, and like I said, davki hasn't made on netilas daim. Avon in kva bircha netilas daim noch shle yafsik and yivarech hamoitzi v'yechel kazayis then v'yafsik. So you have a bit of bread, have a kazayis of bread, and then wait. After his chelechel in tzorich lahafsik. But if you've begun eating, you don't have to stop. That's not a proper eating. It's just so that he shouldn't be a brachal vatal and there shouldn't be a hefsek between the Tzilis Adayim and Hamaitzi. Okay, just finishing off. Ve'im, and the Ramah says at the end, but if he's running out of time, the tefillah, then he should be mafsik for tefillah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ein shuhus ratzaloma, bein shu omed somach la'alis hashacha. For example, it's very close to daybreak to alos. Ayafilu omed betchilas halayla rak sudas oishazu timoshech ad alis hashacha. It's going to be a long meal. That, for example, going sudas kadelis b'mosakah is a big meal in the summer months where the light shalilis katarim, the nights are very short. Tzorich lahafsik miyad b'sis kichovim afilu hischel behetzim b'aydiom nami hadin kain, because we're worried that he's not going to daven at all. Okay, but say that we'll leave it there.